Is there any way that you can assist us in finding this girl now?
As I say, I've never met her.
Personally, I believe Peter Tobin is one of the most dangerous men in the country.
His anger overflowed as he was led from court this evening.
We knew pretty much straight away when she hadn't come home that something serious had happened.
Another awful discovery at Irvine Drive.
Peter Tobin didn't just take my daughter away, he took my life away. He ruined my life, as far as I'm concerned. He ruined it completely.
No, I'm not interested.
You're not interested in helping families who might have missed ones that you might have information about?
It was very apparent that it had been a violent death and that she had been injured really badly.
Mr Tobin is considered a potential risk to members of the public. Any person who sees this man is advised not to approach him.
I was a police officer for 34 years, and in that long career, I never met anyone as evil and dangerous as Peter Tobin.
Glasgow, September 2006. 23-year-old Polish student Angelika Kluk is only days away from completing the summer, living and working in the city before returning to a language studies course at the University of Gdansk.
This was a young girl who was from Poland. She came to Glasgow to better herself, to improve her education. She spoke various languages. She was an intelligent young woman, a person that worked at the church as a cleaner to make extra money. She was given accommodation there. A trusting, lovely, intelligent young woman.
Angelika had been staying in the chapel house of St Patrick's, a busy Catholic church close to the centre of the city. Having already spent the previous summer in Glasgow, she had become a well-known member of the congregation. Parish priest Father Jerry Nugent operated an open-door policy at the church and gave work and accommodation to people in need of a safe place to stay. In August 2006, another person seeking refuge at the church was Patrick McLaughlin. After offering to paint part of the church, he began volunteering with homeless charity Loaves and Fishes, and within just a few weeks, he had won the trust of the priest and other parishioners.
Patrick McLaughlin was the handyman at the church. He was a person that worked for free. It was voluntary work. He was helping the homeless. He was a do-gooder in people's eyes, a person that was at the church. He was everyone's friend.
He painted a room, he put up a shed, he painted the garage door. He did do a good job of these things he was doing, you know, and he done other bits and bobs, whatever Father Jerry needed. Pat would turn his hand to it. He's doing things like that, you know, and Father Jerry thought it was the bee's knees, you know.
With Angelika living at St Patrick's and McLaughlin completing odd jobs at the church, it was only a matter of time before their paths would cross and the pair became friends.
She was someone that wanted to make friends, that wanted to impress and wanted to better her life. He referred to her as his apprentice, and she was someone that trusted this person. He befriended her. She had not that many friends within the church, but she got on well with him and she trusted him.
But behind McLaughlin's apparently friendly demeanour lay a criminal past that stretched back decades. And his arrival at St Patrick's triggered a chain of events that resulted in one of the biggest cross-border police inquiries that Britain had ever seen. After failing to show up for her work on the morning of Monday the 25th of September, Angelika Kluk was reported missing. Police attended the church and questioned all of the parishioners that knew her. That included the church handyman, Pat McLaughlin. When questioned by detectives, McLaughlin claimed to know nothing about Angelika's disappearance and was allowed to leave. But when he didn't show up for work the following day, police became increasingly suspicious. To help find him, they turned to his colleague at the charity, Dennis Curran.
Everybody that works in our charity had a badge with a photograph on it, so that included Pat McLaughlin. And I get his photograph took. And that's the photograph we gave to the police. And that's the photograph they put on television,
Police have released a photograph of a man they want to speak to in connection with the disappearance of a Polish student in Glasgow. Pat McLaughlin is known to have spent time with Angelika Kluk on Sunday. The 23-year-old hasn't been seen since.
That was at 3 o'clock on the Tuesday afternoon, and at 6 o'clock it went nationwide.
Prompted by the release of the photograph, calls from the public began flooding in, and police were inundated with information. One of the calls they received made an astonishing claim.
The last person she was seen alive with was Patrick McLaughlin. His picture was published, and very quickly information came in from the public that that individual was not Patrick McLaughlin. He was the missing sex offender, Peter Tobin.
Peter Tobin was a registered sex offender, having been jailed for the sexual assault of 2 teenagers in the early 1990s. Following his release from prison in 2004, he relocated to his native Scotland, but had since disappeared after attacking a young woman in a flat in Paisley in 2005. Now, it appeared that he was one of the last people to see Angelika Kluk before she went missing.
There was a concern that she was last seen with a missing sex offender, a dangerous individual who himself had disappeared. So when I became involved in this, I reviewed what was happening and we arranged another search of the church. And on the evening, the Friday evening, Angelika Kluk's body was found concealed under the floorboards of the church.
A small hatch in the floor near the confessional box contained a number of bin bags and tarpaulin. A closer inspection revealed that they were covering the bloodied remains of Angelika Kluk. What was a missing person inquiry was now a murder inquiry, and police forensics and pathologists were called in to provide any clues as to how Angelika may have died and who her killer might be. In September 2006, 23-year-old Polish student Angelika Kluk was reported missing, having failed to show up for her cleaning job at St Patrick's Church in Glasgow. Detectives launched a missing person inquiry and questioned parishioners and those who knew Angelika, including the last person to have seen her, church handyman Pat McLaughlin. When McLaughlin failed to show up for work the following day, police became suspicious and discovered that Pat McLaughlin was in fact the missing sex offender, Peter Tobin. Days later, police made a chilling discovery at the church.
Angelika Kluk was under the floorboards. She had been bound and gagged. Her hands were tied with cable ties. She was there on top of polythene sheets. She had been placed under the floor of the church.
The first step was to go and look at the hatch so I could assess in person what the crime scene entailed. And I could see Angelika's body. She was actually directly beneath the trapdoor. She had her legs bent under her from her knees. She was partially obscured with bin bags and tarpaulin. I could see her hands, and I could see that they were tied with cable ties. I could see her trousers were unfastened. Couldn't see her face at that point, but I could see a lot of blood on her hands.
Right away, police had a decision to make. Remove Angelika's body from underneath the floorboards, potentially contaminating any evidence, or forensically examine her body in situ, beneath the floor of the church.
My decision was not to remove her and to leave her under the floorboards and allow the forensic scientists and other experts to do what was required.
Standing, looking down at the hatch, it looked tiny. And I remember it was that narrow that I had a pager on my waistband, and I couldn't fit down with the pager still on my waistband. That's how little room there was. And I sat beside Angelika and then started work.
And almost immediately, Carol Rogers was able to provide detectives with vital information.
We realised pretty quickly that this was what we would term a deposition site, as opposed to the attack site where Angelika had initially been attacked. The next stage is to move any potential DNA, so that would be more intimate samples from her body, from her breasts, from her fingers, from her face, trying to establish anyone who's been in contact with Angelika.
Carol Rogers spent more than 3 hours underneath the floorboards of the church, gathering crucial forensic evidence.
We had the information from the pathologist that Angelika had severe head injuries and had been struck to the head. So from our experience, we knew that that would create these small blood spots, which we term impact spatter. It was very apparent that it had been a violent death and that she had been injured really badly. So the next stage, crime scene-wise, was to try and establish where Angelika had been assaulted, where the initial assault had occurred. We started off by looking at the garage or the workshop, which is attached to the church, because that's where Angelika was last seen. This is a garage that is full of furniture, paint, all sorts of bits and pieces. So it's a case of going through it and looking at all the items and trying to see any evidence of an assault. And then we noticed a tiny blood spot probably a couple of millimetres in diameter on the concrete floor. And once we saw one, we saw another one and another one. So we started circling them with a black pen, and within about 10 minutes we had tens of circles on the floor. And that, in our opinion, was impact spatter, and this was where Angelika had been assaulted. We also saw cast-off blood on the ceiling, and cast-off blood occurs when a weapon has been used, and if a weapon is used to strike someone, as the weapon becomes more and more covered with blood, every time the weapon's moved back and swung back, the action of swinging the weapon and the weapon coming to a halt at the end of the swing casts blood off. And cast-off blood on the ceiling is a really good indication that a weapon with a bit of length has been used. And as it turned out, a table leg had been used.
After an intensive forensic examination, police now knew exactly where and how Angelika had been killed. With prime suspect Peter Tobin seemingly on the run, they began investigating his background. Tobin was born in 1946 in Johnston, just outside Glasgow. The youngest of 4 brothers and 3 sisters, he'd had a troubled childhood, spending time in a proved school and Borstal. In his early 20s, he was jailed for burglary and forgery. Between 1969 and 1989, Tobin married 3 times and had 2 children. But over the years, his relationships were dogged with allegations of physical and mental abuse.
Tobin started very young, sort of minor crime, petty crime. His index offence for when he became a sex offender related to serious sexual offences against young girls in Havant, and he went to prison for that. That was why he was a sex offender. And then he's out, and he's been doing other things, but none of it was reported to the police. It was only when Angelika Kluk was murdered that we started to find other things. We know about the early years when he violently assaulted one of his wives. He cut the head off a dog. All these things, on hindsight, are the earlier behavioural indications of a serial killer.
As the police investigation began unearthing more worrying information about Tobin's past, finding him became their #1 priority. Charity worker Dennis Curran was one of the last people to spend time with him before his true identity was revealed.
The last time I saw Pat McLaughlin was on Monday night. You would never have known that anything had happened. He was just his normal self. The only thing that was a wee bit off was when we were having our meal in McDonald's. He kept getting up and looking out the window and up and looking in the window, and he said he was late. I said, "What's the matter with you?" He says, "Oh, I'm waiting for my mate coming. He said he'd be here about 7:30 or something." Looking back now, I think he's looking to see if there's any police vans coming or anything like that, you know.
Appeals for Peter Tobin were put out nationwide.
Mr. Tobin is considered a potential risk to members of the public. Any person who sees this man is advised not to approach him.
And very quickly, a nurse in a hospital in London recognised an individual who was checked into a hospital in a different name.
Complaining of serious chest pains and using the false name James Kelly, Tobin had sought medical attention at the National Neurology and Neurosurgery Hospital in central London. But the net was closing in on him, and his bid to go undetected as a hospital patient 400 miles away would backfire.
The hospital contacted police. A Metropolitan police officer attended. He recognised him, interviewed him, cautioned him, and Tobin admitted to who he was. and said that he knew why they were looking for him. For me, that was the defining moment of this investigation. And for me, the defining moment, something that I will always remember for the rest of my life.
Tobin was arrested on the 1st of October 2006. Just hours later, Angelika Kluk's body was finally removed from beneath the floorboards of St. Patrick's Church. But police still needed to prove that he was the man responsible for her brutal murder. And forensic evidence from the scene was sent to a lab for examination.
We had a DNA profile from Seaman and Angelika's swabs, so we ran that through the Scottish DNA database. And unfortunately, there was no match at all, which was disappointing.
The result was a bitter setback. But investigators refused to give up and took the crucial decision of widening the parameters of their search in an effort to solve the murder.
By that point, we had an inkling that Peter Tobin may be responsible, and he had previous in England. So although it was negative on the Scottish DNA database, we were hopeful we would get a match on the national. And first thing on the Monday morning, as soon as the database opened, we got a match from Peter Tobin.
Forensic evidence had proved that the police had Angelika's killer in custody. But senior investigating officer David Swindle questioned if an attack as brutal as that inflicted on her could really be the work of a first-time killer.
The ferocity of the killing, the way he'd concealed the body, the fact that he'd left everything under the floor, including the blood-stained knife and weapon, indicated to me that this was someone that had killed before. I decided to look at his life, and very quickly I established that Tobin travelled extensively throughout the UK. This was an individual in the 60s that had lots of cars, that could be in Brighton one minute and that same day be in Scotland. This was someone that had 20, 30 aliases. He had various associations, various wives. So I had real concerns about this individual, and we really needed to look at him closely.
Convinced that Tobin had more to tell, senior investigating officer David Swindle set up a nationwide police investigation to examine Tobin's movements and activities throughout the previous decades.
Operation Anagram involved every police force in the UK. So basically we're looking at the individual, Tobin, the killer. What happened when he was in an area? Did someone go missing in that area? Was there an unresolved homicide? What did the victim look like? It was a brilliant example of information sharing between police forces.
Letters and case notes were sent to all 43 British police forces. It wasn't long before David and his team would make their first breakthrough, and it was one very close to home, 35 miles along the M8 in Bathgate, West Lothian.
When we're looking at Tobin's life, we find out that he lived in Bathgate, a town in Scotland, short distance from where a teenager had gone missing, a massive missing in person inquiry years ago. For me, I thought, he's got to be connected. That, in my mind, was another defining moment in my career. And that was something that led to further investigations and pushed Anagram.
In 1991, Bathgate became the central focus of the biggest missing persons investigation in Scottish history, following the disappearance of 15-year-old schoolgirl Vicky Hamilton.
Vicky was a teenager from the Falkirk area of Scotland, a very normal teenager. She lived at home with her mother, her younger brother and sister. She was educated at high school in Falkirk and was a very popular girl.
On Sunday the 10th of February, Vicky was returning home after a weekend at her sister's house in nearby Livingston. The hour-long journey back home to Falkirk required her to change buses in the centre of Bathgate.
From the start, she wanted to do this on her own. She was getting independent, and wanted to go into the big world, basically. And when she left Livingston that night, her sister put her on the bus, and she got to Bathgate, and after Bathgate, that was it. Nobody had seen her.
Vicky alighted from the bus in the Steelyard. She was supposed to be going to the bus stop opposite the police station. We know that Vicky started to make that journey. We also know that she went to the chip shop where she bought chips and that she sat on a seat in the Steelyard, which was really the last sighting of Vicky.
I can remember as though it was yesterday, aye. Well, it was one of the biggest searches in Scotland. They stopped traffic in Bathgate, put out pamphlets, spoke to lorry drivers that left Bathgate that night, trains that left, buses that left. But, I mean, the public were really helpful. It was in all the pubs, people speaking about it, you know, and no, there was nothing come of it.
The only potential clue the police had about Vicky's whereabouts was found 20 miles away in the Scottish capital.
A week after Vicky Hamilton went missing, her purse was found in St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh. The purse was examined at that time forensically with the techniques that were available. However, nothing was found on the purse.
Extensive inquiries were carried out on the streets of Bathgate, but the police could find no details about Vicky's final movements, and with no other leads to follow, the case went cold.
It was devastating. Everybody was devastated. We all feared the worst. We knew there's something sinister had happened to her because there's no way she would have did what she did. She just disappeared.
September 2006, and police have found the bloodied body of missing Polish student Angelika Kluk underneath the floorboards of a church in Glasgow. A forensic examination of the scene linked the convicted sex offender Peter Tobin to her murder. Following a nationwide manhunt, Tobin was eventually detained over 400 miles away, having admitted himself into a London hospital under a false name. Tobin's trial for the murder of Angelika got underway at Edinburgh High Court in March 2007. Following a 6-week hearing, he was found guilty of the rape and murder of Angelika Kluk and sentenced to serve a minimum of 21 years in prison. Despite being safely behind bars for the murder of Angelika, detectives remained convinced that Tobin was not revealing all, and the nationwide probe into his past continued. The investigation revealed that in 1986, age 40, Peter Tobin married his third wife, who was 16 years old. After 3 years in Brighton, they relocated to a house on Robertson Avenue in Bathgate, just a 5-minute drive away from the town centre, where 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton was last seen alive in February 1991.
Peter Tobin lived in Bathgate from 1989 until 1991, initially with his wife. During his stay in Bathgate, he was unemployed. It's known that he bought and sold second-hand cars to make some money. And we also know that about 6 months prior to Vicky Hamilton going missing, his wife left him and that he lived in the house alone.
Armed with this new information, detectives from West Lothian CID made the crucial decision to search the property in a bid to find anything that would link Peter Tobin to Vicky's disappearance.
The search was centred on looking for bloodstains or DNA which could prove whether or not Vicky Hamilton had been in that house. During the early part of the search, items were being removed from the house. The loft area was searched and items removed. During that search, there was a knife found which had fallen down or been secreted between a roof joist and a brick wall. Sometime later, the forensic examination revealed a piece of skin on the knife, which, when examined, produced a DNA profile of Vicky Hamilton. The discovery of the knife was hugely important as it took us forward in relation to Vicky's disappearance. The fact that the knife was in the house which Tobin occupied showed that he may have been responsible for her disappearance and possible demise.
Tobin, already in custody for the murder of Angelika Kluk, was now interviewed about the disappearance of teenager Vicky Hamilton.
As Tobin was being interviewed, I was in an adjoining room where I could view the interview on camera. During the interview, I felt that Tobin was very manipulative and at times was trying to control the direction of the interview. One of the things he did during the interview was to say that he had a sore back and that he was unable to sit. This allowed him to stand, and he stood for the whole interview. And it was quite noticeable that he was standing above the officers who were asking him questions. The officers had to continually bring him back to where they wanted the interview to go.
Is there any way that you can assist us in finding this girl now?
Eventually, Tobin was questioned about the knife that had been found in the loft of his Bathgate home.
The knife was produced, and he was asked questions regarding it. His initial response was to admit that he had owned a knife similar to that, which he did without any prompting at all. Once the significance of the knife was explained to Tobin, he changed his story completely and denied any knowledge of the knife.
When Tobin was interviewed in relation to Vicky Hamilton, he became aggressive during that interview. He denied knowing her. It was put to him various things that could link him to her. His DNA was on the knife found in his house at Bathgate, but he was adamant and very controlling towards the officers and quite aggressive towards the interviewing officers that he didn't know her.
As I say, I've never met her. You know what I mean? I've never.
You have no knowledge of where?
No.
Peter Tobin gave up nothing in relation to his involvement or knowledge of Vicky Hamilton. He denied very, very strongly that he had ever seen Vicky Hamilton. He stated that he had never been in her company, and he also stated that he was not responsible for her disappearance. At that point, I was 100% sure that Tobin was telling lies.
Looking at the interview of Peter Tobin confirmed to me that this was an individual that would admit nothing and was someone that was very controlling and someone that had committed other crimes.
And detectives were also able to call on developments in forensic science to re-examine Vicky's purse, found on the streets of Edinburgh back in 1991.
It was decided that we would examine the purse for DNA using new techniques. These techniques provided 2 DNA samples on the purse, one on either side. At the time they were found, I was informed that the DNA profiles were male. They were very similar to Peter Tobin's, however, they were not Peter Tobin's DNA. I was able to tell the scientists that Tobin actually had 2 offspring, 2 male offspring, and inquiries were carried out with both these men, and the DNA found on the purse matched perfectly one of Tobin's sons, who at the time Vicky went missing, he was 3 years old. The forensic examination revealed a piece of skin on the knife, which when examined produced a DNA profile of Vicky Hamilton.
In a disturbing twist, it appeared that after abducting Vicky, Tobin had given his 3-year-old toddler Vicky's purse to play with. This explained the presence of his son's DNA.
The interview concluded with Peter Tobin being charged with the abduction of Vicky Hamilton. At that time, we had not recovered Vicky's body.
Despite denying any knowledge of what happened to Vicky Hamilton, the forensic evidence found in the house was enough to convince police that he'd been responsible for her abduction, and they could now piece together the teenager's final movements.
Although it could never be proved, the probability is that she probably stopped Peter Tobin in Bathgate and asked him for directions. A trusting soul was Vicky, and I believe that she may have gone with him, thinking that she was going to be helped.
Detectives now believed they knew how Vicky had gone missing and who was responsible. But with Tobin uncooperative, there was still no indication as to where her body might be. As detectives in West Lothian worked on building the case against Tobin, Operation Anagram continued to track the killer's past, and officers believed they may have found a link between Tobin and the historic disappearance of 18-year-old Dinah McNicol, over 500 miles away in the southeast of England.
Dinah had gone away for the weekend to attend a music festival down in Liphook in Hampshire, and she'd gone away with some friends to attend this festival. Whilst at the festival, she met a young man. As a single girl, that was fine. She got on very well with this young man. Her friends needed to get back to London at the end of the festival, but some campers were staying on for an extra day, and Dinah decided to stay on for the extra day with the young man. They left. Neither of them had any money or transport, so they decided that they would hitchhike home. He lived in a different area to where Dinah lived, so they partied. So they got a lift on the A3, and then they parted company on the M25, and that was the last time anyone saw Dinah alive.
Police launched a major search for Dinah, but found nothing. Her disappearance was a mystery, and her family immediately feared the worst.
We knew pretty much straight away that something serious had happened. Back in those days, there was no mobile phones or anything like that, but we were all very good at picking the phone up and ringing in and just saying if we were going to be late or anything at all like that.
When she was 6, Dinah's mother died in a car crash, and on her 18th birthday, Dinah became entitled to £2,000, compensation for her mother's accident. Following her disappearance, one of the very few leads that police had was that Dinah's bank cards continued to be used after she went missing. Back in 1991, they were unable to use this information to pinpoint a suspect. But 16 years later, Operation Anagram was able to place Peter Tobin in the very same towns that the cash withdrawals were made, and crucially at the same time. 6 weeks after Vicky's disappearance in February 1991, Peter Tobin moved to the south coast to be nearer his young son. He moved into a house in Margate and quickly settled into life in the seaside town.
Well, I first met Peter Tobin 1991 when he moved in next door. Pretty average bloke, nothing special, nothing untoward. It's like any other new neighbour then. He was very friendly. He was very friendly with most of the neighbours. If I hadn't got a tool or something I wanted to borrow one, yeah, Pete would have it, and likewise he would lend one off me. We spent most of the summer chatting on his doorstep. So yes, we had lots of chats, but the only way I can describe him was he was like a Walter Mitty character. He came up with weird and wonderful tales and stories about what he'd done and where he'd been and so on, so much so that to the end I got to the stage where I'll shrug my shoulders, and that was Pete.
When, as part of Operation Anagram, David was questioned about his seemingly perfect neighbour, he recalled one conversation in particular which would provide detectives with a crucial break in the investigation.
So I glanced out the top window one day and spotted him digging a trench in the back garden. So being curious, and I went down and leant across and said, "Are you going for Australia, Pete?" Because it was quite a deep trench. And he said, "No," and he said, "I'm building a sandpit for the youngster when he comes up." A couple of days later, it was all filled in. So I said, "What happened to your sandpit, Pete?" "Oh," he said, "the social worker said it was dangerous for the youngster." Then in 2007, we had a visit from the police, and they wanted to know whether Tobin did any housework, DIY, and then I remembered the sandpit, and I mentioned this to them, and they seemed to be very interested in that.
With police able to establish that Tobin was living in the south of England at the time of Dinah's disappearance, Essex police started an extensive search of the house and excavated the garden at Irwin Drive.
Operation Anagram investigations indicated that Dinah McNicol could have been killed and buried in Irwin Drive in Margate, so excavations and searches were conducted there with the hope of finding her.
Essex police contacted my father. I think they were working in conjunction with Scottish police at the time, and I think they'd received a tip-off from the police in Scotland, and they were going to start to investigate the grounds and garden of a property in Margate. And they said to us, we believe strongly that we are going to find Dinah's remains within this property.
They literally took the garden to pieces, and we had policemen round the back alleyway. There was police guarding the house. I even had to sign to get in and out of my own house, so it was pretty much a lockdown.
It wasn't long before the police made a gruesome discovery, and just hours later, detectives would make a statement that would surprise everyone.
Short announcement. I can't take questions afterwards, but it is a short announcement. There has been a significant discovery within the last couple of hours.
In March 2007, convicted sex offender Peter Tobin was jailed for the murder and rape of Angelika Kluk. But the way Tobin had killed her and the manner in which he'd gagged and bound her body before hiding it under the floorboards of a Glasgow church led detectives to believe that this was, in all likelihood, not the work of a first-time killer. A large-scale nationwide inquiry now linked Peter Tobin to the murder of 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton, who went missing from Bathgate in 1991. And police were now concerned that Tobin may also be holding back information about the disappearance of 18-year-old Dinah McNicol, who had also been missing since 1991. Their investigations had taken them to Tobin's former home at Irvine Drive in Margate. After an extensive search of the grounds, police officers looking for Dinah's body announced that they'd made a grim discovery. But what they revealed next would surprise everybody.
I was contacted by Essex Police, who informed me that they'd removed a body to the mortuary, but that it was evident that it wasn't the body of Dinah McNicol. Due to jewellery worn by the body and physical description, it became very apparent that, although we assumed this was the body of Dinah McNicol, it was in fact the body of Vicky Hamilton.
I could not believe that her body had ended up in a garden in Kent. For me, that is something that really put it into my mind about Tobin and his ability to move throughout the UK killing people.
Unbelievably, 16 years after vanishing without a trace from the streets of Bathgate in Scotland, the body of Vicky Hamilton had been discovered almost 500 miles away at Tobin's former home in Margate. And just like the murder of Angelika Kluk, all the evidence pointed to a violent and savage attack.
Vicky's body had been dissected and was in two parts, a torso and legs. Each part had been placed within polythene bags. 13 bags around the torso and 11 bags on the legs. This process preserved Vicky's body because it kept the body free from any oxygen. And as such, Vicky was easily recognisable.
We'd been prepared to find Dinah, and then they've told us that another poor girl, her remains had been found. So it was a mixture of feelings, because obviously we'd been hoping that they would find her, and then some other family has had to go through all of the pain and everything else of them discovering her body as well.
The whereabouts of Dinah McNicol remained a mystery, but after 17 years of heartbreaking uncertainty, detectives in Scotland could finally tell Michael Hamilton the truth about what had happened to his daughter Vicky.
It was devastating when we heard the news that it was Vicky. You say to yourself, we're never going to see her again, but when you get the news, that is devastating news for to be told that she's dead and she's been found. And it was really devastating, really, it was.
The horrific discovery of Vicky's body would finally allow police to close the book on one of Scotland's most high-profile and longest-running missing person investigations.
Our case was now complete with the recovery of Vicky's body. The further evidence that we found in Margate allowed us then to charge Tobin not only with Vicky's abduction, but also with rape and murder.
And for the family of Dinah McNicol, the wait for answers was almost over. Back in Margate, police were still convinced that Peter Tobin's former back garden held the key to her disappearance.
The police had informed us that they had very good intelligence that they would find Dinah's remains within the property of the house in Margate. And we believed them.
And just days after finding Vicky's body, police suspicions were proved right.
There has been a significant discovery within the last couple of hours here at Irvine Drive. There has been another body discovered.
Police later confirmed that the second body found buried at Irvine Drive was that of Dinah McNicol. Her body had been tightly bound, gagged and wrapped in 16 heavy-duty plastic bags, which were found to have Peter Tobin's fingerprints on them. And like Vicky Hamilton, the post-mortem revealed that she had been drugged before being murdered.
The police asked if we would like to go down and visit the house in Margate. My dad was quite frail at this stage. I went down with him to view the house. he went into the garden to actually see where it happened. In fact, we both went into the garden to look at where it had happened, and just see where Dinah's last resting place was.
Despite evidence of the sickening ordeal that his sister had been subjected to, the discovery of Dinah's body brought to an end 17 years of pain to Dan and the rest of her family.
When they informed us that the second remains were Dinah's, it was a massive weight off our shoulders. It was a relief. We were able to hold a funeral in our local village, invite lots of her school friends, and it was a joyous occasion, really. My dad sang at the funeral, and it was really nice just to be able to say goodbye to Dinah and sort of share that with friends and family as well. Dinah probably would have had a fantastic life. She had everything to look forward to. She was cut down right in the prime of her life. It's such a shame. It's such a shame. My children are missing an auntie and potentially cousins, and all of us are missing a sister as well.
There's no day goes by that I don't think about Vicky. I think about Vicky every day, all the time. I mean, I've not just lost Vicky, I've lost grandmates too. I could have grandchildren, and enjoying their life, them enjoying theirs, and her. But no, I never had the chance to get that one, that far, because of the evil man that he was.
In December 2008, Tobin, already serving a life sentence for the rape and murder of Angelika Kluk, was found guilty of the murder of Vicky Hamilton. 12 months later, he was convicted of the murder of Dinah McNicol, with the jury taking just 13 minutes to reach their verdict.
Every day we went to the trial at Chelmsford Crown Court, and it was the first time I'd got to actually see Peter Tobin. I'd seen photographs of him in the newspapers, but it was the first time I got to see him, and he just looked like a small, angry old man.
When he was sentenced up in Dundee, that was the best day of my life, for a long, long time in my life, because I knew at his age there was no way he was coming back out of the prison.
Tobin is one of around 70 prisoners in the UK to be serving a whole life tariff, meaning he will never be allowed to seek parole and will die behind bars. In 2018, he was diagnosed with cancer, and over the past 2 years, his condition is understood to have deteriorated. Despite this, he has still never admitted to any of his crimes. And the man who set up Operation Anagram believes that Tobin will take more secrets to the grave.
Tobin has never admitted his crimes. He's a coward, he's a predator, he's a murderer, he's a serial killer. He's never admitted what he's done. He has no respect for the victims or their families.
I'm not interested.
You're not interested in helping families who might have missed ones that you might have information about?
I couldn't give a...
No, that's it. You have no humanity about you, do you?
Throughout his life, Peter Tobin often appeared to be a likeable, helpful and trustworthy man, a good Samaritan who was quick to make friends and charm neighbours. In reality, he was a cold and calculated serial killer who preyed on the vulnerability of his victims, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake and destroying the lives of countless families across the country.
Peter Tobin didn't just take my daughter away, he took my life away. He ruined my life, as far as I'm concerned. He ruined it completely. I've lost everything. And I've lost Vicky.
I'm not particularly religious, and the whole eye for an eye thing doesn't really wash with me, but I'm just confident that the justice system will never let him out, and he will have to see the rest of his days behind bars.
Personally, I believe Peter Tobin is one of the most dangerous men in the country. He's been convicted of 3 murders of young females. Very, very difficult to prove, but I believe that he may be responsible for other crimes.
I was a police officer for 34 years, and in that long career, I never met anyone as evil and dangerous as Peter Tobin.